Imagine spending $2 million, not on a house, not on a yacht, not on a private jet, $2 million on a helmet, a single helmet, one piece of headgear that sits on the skull of a pilot hurtling through the sky at over 1,000 miles per hour. $2 million for something you wear on your head. That sounds insane. That sounds like the kind of government waste that late-night comedians write jokes about. But here is the thing: when you understand what that helmet actually does, when you understand the technology packed into that visor, that carbon fiber shell, those sensors, those processors, those cameras, you will not laugh. You will be terrified, because this is not a helmet. This is the most advanced piece of wearable technology ever built by human hands, and it gives the pilot wearing it something that no human being in the history of warfare has ever possessed. It gives them God vision. Welcome to the story of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter's helmet-mounted display system. A story that spans decades of military ambition, billions of dollars in research, countless engineering failures, and ultimately one of the most astonishing technological achievements in the history of aviation. A story that begins not in a cockpit, but in a very different kind of battlefield, the battlefield of human perception itself. To understand why this helmet exists, you have to understand what it feels like to be a fighter pilot in combat. Not the Hollywood version, not Top Gun, the real version, the version where you are strapped into a metal tube moving faster than the speed of sound, where the sky around you is an invisible maze of radar signals and missile tracks and enemy aircraft you cannot see. The version where the difference between life and death is measured not in seconds, but in fractions of seconds. In that environment, information is everything. The pilot who knows more, who sees more, who understands more about what is happening around them at any given instant, that pilot survives. That pilot wins. And for most of aviation history, getting that information to a pilot was one of the hardest problems engineers ever tried to solve. Go back to the Second World War. Go back to the skis over Britain, over the Pacific, over Germany. The cockpits of those legendary aircraft, the Spitfire, the P-51 Mustang, the Mitsubishi Zero, were primitive by modern standards. The pilot had a handful of analog gauges, a compass and altimeter, a fuel gauge and airspeed indicator. To get information about what was happening outside the aircraft, they had to look out the canopy with their own eyes. They had to physically turn their head, physically scan the sky, physically find the enemy. And when the enemy was behind them, above them, closing at high speed from a blind angle, they often never saw it coming. The phrase "check your six," meaning look behind you at the 6 o'clock position, became a survival mantra because the space behind the aircraft was a place of death. A place where enemies hid and where pilots died. The jet age made this problem exponentially worse. When aircraft began flying at supersonic speeds, the window of time available to a pilot to detect a threat, process that information, make a decision, and take action compressed to almost nothing. At Mach 1, you are covering roughly 340 meters every single second. At Mach 2, that doubles. By the time a human eye can detect an object, by the time the brain can process what it is seeing, by the time a hand can move to respond, the geometry of the battle has already changed completely. Speed became the enemy of awareness. And awareness was the thing that kept pilots alive. The solution that dominated military aviation for decades was the heads-up display, the HUD. Rather than forcing the pilot to look down at instruments inside the cockpit, the HUD projected critical flight data, airspeed, altitude, heading, weapons information, onto a transparent piece of glass mounted in the pilot's forward field of view. It was a revolutionary idea. It kept the pilot looking forward, kept their eyes on the world outside, while simultaneously feeding them the data they needed to fly and fight. The HUD became standard equipment on virtually every advanced military aircraft from the 1970s onward. It was a lifesaver. It was also, from the moment it was introduced, already obsolete in concept, because a HUD only works when you are looking straight ahead. The moment a pilot turns their head to check a threat on the left, to track a target banking above, to scan for a missile coming from below, the HUD data disappears. It is fixed to the glass, fixed to the forward direction. And in a three-dimensional 360-degree aerial battlefield, the forward direction is only one of an infinite number of directions that matter. Engineers knew this. For years, for decades, they dreamed of a different kind of system. A system that would follow the pilot's head wherever it moved. A system that would put the data, all of it, every piece of critical information, directly in the pilot's line of sight no matter where they were looking. Helmet-mounted sights, early and rudimentary, began appearing on some Soviet aircraft in the 1970s. They allowed a pilot to cue a weapon by looking at the target, a concept called a high off-bore sight shot, meaning a shot that did not require the aircraft to be pointed directly at the enemy. This was a significant tactical advantage. If you could simply look at an enemy aircraft and fire a missile that would chase that aircraft wherever it went, you no longer needed to maneuver into a narrow firing cone behind your target. You could shoot from any angle. You could look left and fire left while flying right. It changed the calculus of close-range aerial combat entirely. The United States military took notice, and they began investing in something far more ambitious than a simple targeting cue. They began investing in a system that would fuse all available information: sensor data, radar data, weapons data, navigation data, threat data, and project it seamlessly onto a visor that moved with the pilot's head. The dream was a system so integrated, so comprehensive, so intuitive that the aircraft itself would seem to become transparent. A pilot would not look at their aircraft anymore. They would look through it. Below them, through the floor of the cockpit, they would see the ground. Behind them, through the tail of the aircraft, they would see the sky. Surrounding them in every direction, they would see a composite picture of the battlefield, stitched together from every sensor the aircraft carried, displayed right there in front of their eyes. God vision. The ability to see everything everywhere at once. This was the dream. And the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter was the program chosen to make that dream real. The F-35 program itself is one of the most ambitious, most expensive, and most controversial weapons procurement efforts in the history of the United States military. Designed to replace multiple aging aircraft across multiple branches of service, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and to be sold to allied nations around the world, the F-35 was conceived as the future of tactical aviation. A fifth-generation stealth fighter that could do almost everything, fly almost anywhere, and defeat almost any adversary. The program has cost, depending on how you count it, somewhere in the vicinity of $1.7 trillion over its full life cycle. It has been plagued by delays, cost overruns, software problems, and structural failures. Critics have called it the most expensive weapons system in human history. Supporters call it the most capable. Both are probably right. And at the center of the F-35's capability, more than the stealth coating, more than the advanced radar, more than the thrust vectoring engine, sits the helmet. The helmet-mounted display system, known as the Gen III HMDS, designed and built by a company called Elbit Systems of America in partnership with Rockwell Collins, and now produced by Collins Aerospace. Each one costs approximately $400,000 in earlier versions, and has risen to figures approaching $2 million per unit in the most advanced configurations. Each one is custom-fitted to the specific pilot who will wear it, because the fit must be precise, because the weight distribution must be perfect, because at 9 GS, 9 times the force of gravity, even a few extra ounces on one side of your head can cause catastrophic neck injury. Let us talk about what is actually inside this helmet, because the materials and the engineering are almost incomprehensible in their complexity. The shell of the helmet is constructed from carbon fiber composite materials, extremely strong, extremely light. It has to be, because it carries an enormous amount of equipment that must not become a liability during high-G maneuvers. The visor, the piece of transparent material in front of the pilot's eyes, is not glass. It is a specially treated polycarbonate substrate coated with multiple layers of optical coatings, including a semi-reflective layer that allows computer-generated imagery to be projected onto it while simultaneously allowing the pilot to see through it with perfect clarity. Visor is shaped to serve as a projection surface, curving around the pilot's face in a way that maximizes the field of view for the projected display. Inside the helmet, embedded in the shell itself, are a series of position tracking sensors. These sensors communicate with a system mounted inside the cockpit that tracks exactly where the pilot's head is pointed at any given instant, not just left and right, but up and down, rotating and tilting in 3 dimensions with extraordinary precision. The tracking update rate is extremely fast, measured in milliseconds, so that when the pilot moves their head, the projected display moves with it seamlessly, without lag, without jitter, without any perceptible delay. Lag in a helmet-mounted display is not merely an inconvenience. It is a safety problem. If there is a perceptible delay between where your head is pointing and where the display says you are pointing, your spatial awareness breaks down. Your brain gets confused. In early versions of the F-35 helmet, this lag was one of the most significant problems engineers had to solve, and it took years of iterative development to get it right. The display itself, what the pilot actually sees projected on that visor, is generated by a pair of tiny but extraordinarily powerful projectors, one for each eye. These projectors create images that appear to float in space in front of the pilot, layered seamlessly over their view of the real world. Airspeed, altitude, heading, G-load, weapons status, target information, threat indicators, all of it appears exactly where the pilot needs to see it, oriented to whatever direction they are looking, scaling and repositioning dynamically as their perspective changes. The system knows exactly where the aircraft is in space, exactly where the pilot's head is pointing, and calculates in real time exactly what information should appear, and exactly where on the visor it should appear, to maintain a coherent, accurate picture no matter how rapidly the situation changes. But all of that, as impressive as it is not the most remarkable thing about this helmet. The most remarkable thing is what happens when you combine that display with the F-35's Distributed Aperture System. The Distributed Aperture System, the DAS, is a network of 6 electro-optical infrared cameras mounted at precisely calculated positions around the exterior of the F-35 airframe, one facing forward, one facing aft, 2 on either side, 2 more providing coverage above and below. Together, these 6 cameras provide complete spherical coverage around the aircraft, 360 degrees in every direction simultaneously, with no blind spots, no gaps, no limitations. And the imagery from all 6 cameras is fused together by an onboard computer in real time to create a single seamless sphere of imagery, a complete picture of everything that surrounds the aircraft in every direction at every moment. This fused imagery is then fed through fiber optic cables running through the helmet itself, directly to the projectors inside the helmet. And what the pilot sees is this: no matter which direction they look, no matter whether they are looking forward or sideways or upward or straight down through the cockpit floor, the imagery from the DAS camera that covers that direction is projected onto their visor. They are in effect seeing through the aircraft. The fuselage becomes invisible. The floor of the cockpit becomes a window to the earth below. The tail of the aircraft becomes a window to the sky behind. The pilot can look down at their own feet and see the ground 10,000 feet beneath them, as if the aircraft were made of glass. The thermal infrared nature of the DAS imagery adds another layer of capability that is even more tactically significant. Because infrared cameras do not detect visible light, they detect heat. And heat is something that cannot be hidden. An aircraft engine running hot, a missile in flight trailing a plume of superheated exhaust, a vehicle on the ground with a warm engine, all of these show up on an infrared sensor whether or not they are visible to the naked eye. In darkness, in clouds, in haze and smoke and the chaos of a battlefield, the DAS sees through conditions that would render a human eye useless, and it feeds that imagery directly to the pilot's visor. There is a moment that test pilots who have flown the F-35 describe again and again. A moment that happens sometimes when they first experience the full integration of the HMDS and the DAS together. They are in the air and they look down through their own knees, through the cockpit floor, through the belly of the aircraft, and they see the ground below them. And in that moment, something shifts in the brain. Something ancient and primal and deeply tied to the human experience of being a physical creature with a physical body occupying physical space, something shifts. Because you are a person in a metal machine in the sky, and you are looking through that metal machine as if it is not there. The boundary between your body and the aircraft blurs. You are not inside a vehicle anymore. You are the vehicle. You are a thing that flies, and you can see everything around you the way a god sees, not from a fixed point of view but from everywhere all at once. This is not metaphor. This is engineering. But it produces something that feels in the pilot's experience genuinely transcendent. Now let us go deeper into the threat detection capability, because this is where the tactical implications become truly staggering. The F-35 carries an advanced active electronically scanned array radar, the APG-81, that can track multiple targets simultaneously, detect stealth aircraft at closer ranges than older radars, and perform electronic warfare functions that would have been classified science fiction to a pilot flying 30 years ago. The data from this radar is fed into the helmet display in real time, overlaid on the pilot's visual field as symbology and targeting brackets that identify the location, speed, heading, and threat classification of every radar contact in the surrounding airspace. A pilot does not need to look at a radar screen inside the cockpit. The radar information comes to them wherever they look. Beyond the radar, the F-35 carries the AN/ASQ-239 electronic warfare system, a system that passively detects radar signals from enemy aircraft and ground systems, classifies those signals by type, identifies the platform they likely belong to, and provides threat alerts. When an enemy radar locks onto the F-35, the pilot knows immediately. They know where it is, they know what it is, they know what kind of threat it represents. And all of that information appears instantly in the helmet display, keyed to the direction of the threat, so that the pilot can look directly at where the threat is located and see the threat data floating in the air in front of them like an augmented reality marker showing danger. Add to this the data link capability of the F-35, the Multifunction Advanced Data Link, or MADL, which allows the aircraft to share sensor data in real time with other F-35s in the same formation without broadcasting on frequencies that enemy systems can detect. In practice, this means that what one F-35 sees, all the F-35s in the formation can see. The pilot of one aircraft can have the radar picture from another aircraft 50 miles away projected into their helmet display, expanding their situational awareness far beyond what any single aircraft's sensors could provide. The formation becomes a networked intelligence organism, each member contributing to a shared picture of the battlespace that no individual aircraft could build alone. The sum of all of this, the DAS, the radar, the electronic warfare system, the data link, is something that military analysts call sensor fusion. And sensor fusion projected seamlessly into the helmet of the pilot doing the fighting is the thing that changes everything. It is the thing that makes the $2 million price tag not just defensible but arguably a bargain. Consider the alternative. Consider what it costs to lose a pilot. A military pilot represents somewhere between $6 and $10 million in training costs by the time they reach full operational capability. Add the cost of the aircraft they're flying. An F-35A costs approximately $80 million per unit. An F-35C for carrier operations costs roughly $110 million. The loss of a pilot and aircraft in combat is not just a human tragedy. It is an enormous financial and strategic loss. If the helmet gives that pilot a decisive awareness advantage, if it turns a situation where they might have been surprised into a situation where they are the one doing the surprising, then $2 million for the helmet starts to look like the most cost-effective investment in the entire system. But the helmet is not without its difficulties. Its development history is a story of ambition, repeatedly crashing into the wall of physical reality. The first serious problem that emerged was image quality. In the early development phases, pilots reported that the night vision imagery from the DAS was grainy, washed out, inconsistent. The cameras were good, but the imagery processing and display technology available at the time could not render the Fuse 6 camera sphere at the quality needed for pilots to make reliable identification judgments. Was that contact another F-35 or an enemy fighter? Was that shape on the ground a tank or a civilian vehicle? At low resolution, these distinctions blur. And in warfare, blurring distinctions costs lives. Billions of dollars and years of engineering work went into progressively upgrading the DAS camera resolution and the image processing pipeline until the imagery reached the quality where pilots could actually trust it to make targeting decisions. The second problem was latency. We touched on this earlier, but it deserves deeper examination. The human visual system is extraordinarily sensitive to mismatches between where you think you are looking and what you see in front of your eyes. This sensitivity evolved over millions of years because such mismatches in the natural world are always caused by something going wrong, an injury, an illness, a disturbance of the inner ear. When a helmet display lags behind the pilot's head movement even by a few tens of milliseconds, the brain perceives it as a kind of dizziness, a visual vestibular conflict that causes disorientation and nausea. Early F-35 pilots reported exactly these symptoms. Some called it like flying while drunk. In combat, being drunk is fatal. The latency had to come down. Engineers worked for years developing faster head tracking algorithms, faster display processors, faster data pipelines through the fiber optic connections, until the lag was reduced to a level the human brain could no longer perceive as lag. The third problem was fit. Each F-35 HMDS is custom molded to the individual pilot's head using a casting process that creates a precise fit. This custom fit is not a luxury, it is a survival requirement. At the G-forces an F-35 can pull, inertia turns any mass on a pilot's head into a lever that tries to rip the head and neck in undesired directions. A helmet that fits poorly, that sits even slightly asymmetrically, that distributes weight unevenly, becomes a neck injury risk at high G. The HMDS is already significantly heavier than a conventional helmet due to all the electronics inside it. This weight, meticulously balanced and precisely fitted, has to sit on a pilot's head for flights that can last many hours. The custom fitting process adds time and cost to the manufacturing of each helmet, but it is non-negotiable. The fourth problem, and this one is perhaps the most philosophically interesting, is what happens to a human mind when it is given too much information too fast. There is a concept in cognitive psychology called cognitive overload. It refers to what happens when the volume of information presented to a human mind exceeds the mind's capacity to process it. And the F-35 HMDS at full capability presents an almost overwhelming amount of information. Radar contacts, DAS imagery, electronic warfare alerts, weapons status, fuel state, navigation data, communications, data link feeds from other aircraft, all of it all at once overlaid on the pilot's visual field. For experienced pilots who have spent years building the cognitive frameworks to interpret this information, the system is a revelation. For less experienced pilots, it can be paralyzing. The challenge of training F-35 pilots is not just teaching them to fly the aircraft or employ the weapons. It is teaching them to think in an entirely new way, to manage the information environment the helmet creates, to rapidly triage what matters and what can wait, to prevent the flood of data from becoming a flood that drowns decision-making. The military calls this skill information management, and it is increasingly the defining skill of the modern fighter pilot. Not hand-eye coordination in the old sense, not the ability to pull hard turns or time a gunshot visually. Those skills matter, but they matter less than they once did. What matters now is the ability to look at a complex, multi-layer picture of a battle space and instantly understand it. To see the contacts, the threats, the opportunities, the terrain, the friendlies, the unknowns, and make a decision in the time it takes to blink. The helmet enables this. But the helmet also demands it. Let us step back now and think about what this technology means in the broader sweep of military history. Because the F-35 HMDS is not just a piece of equipment, it is a symptom of a transformation in the nature of aerial warfare that has been building for decades and is now reaching its culmination. For most of aviation history, fighter combat was a visual, kinesthetic, almost visceral experience. The great aces of World War I and World War II won their victories through the combination of exceptional eyesight, extraordinary physical coordination, deep instinctive understanding of aircraft energy management, and the willingness to endure physical punishment that would incapacitate lesser men. They were aerial athletes. They won with their bodies, with their eyes, with their reflexes. The missile age of the 1950s and 60s complicated this picture. Suddenly, aircraft could kill each other at ranges beyond visual detection. But the guidance systems of early missiles were unreliable, and the rules of engagement often required visual identification of a target before firing, because in a complex battle space you could not afford to shoot down your own allies by mistake. So even in the missile age, pilots had to close to visual range to fight, had to see and be seen, had to maneuver in the three-dimensional space that the great aces of earlier wars would have recognized. The F-35 HMDS, combined with modern beyond visual range missiles and the advanced sensor systems of fifth-generation aircraft, is the technology that finally and decisively breaks this pattern. Pilot equipped with the HMDS, flying an F-35 with its full suite of sensors active and data linked to its formation partners, can detect, identify, target, and kill an enemy aircraft at ranges so far beyond visual detection that the enemy pilot may never know they were in a fight until a missile hits them. The battle has moved from the physical domain, the domain of muscle and reflex and courage in the face of the visible, to the information domain. The domain of data and sensors and algorithms and the ability to process complexity faster than the enemy can. This is not a minor shift. This is a revolution, and the helmet is the interface through which that revolution is delivered to the human being at the center of it. Nations around the world have recognized this. The F-35 program, despite its cost overruns and controversies, has attracted a roster of allied purchasers that reads like a directory of the world's most capable air forces. The United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Israel, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Singapore. Each of these nations has made the calculation at enormous expense that the capability represented by the F-35 and its integrated systems, including the helmet, is worth the price. That the alternative, flying older, less capable aircraft against an adversary equipped with fifth-generation technology, is a risk they cannot accept. Israel, in particular, has been watching this technology with intensely practical eyes. The Israeli Air Force, which flies under a different designation as F-35I Adir aircraft, has already employed the F-35 in combat operations in the Middle East, the first operational combat use of the aircraft anywhere in the world. Israeli pilots have reported that the situational awareness advantages provided by the F-35's integrated systems, including the helmet, are as significant as advertised. The ability to know at any moment exactly what is happening in the airspace around you and to act on that knowledge faster than the adversary can react, represents an asymmetric advantage that more than compensates for the aircraft's cost. China and Russia, predictably, have not been idle observers of this development. Both nations are engaged in the development of their own helmet-mounted display systems for their fifth-generation aircraft programs, Russia's Su-57 and China's J-20. Neither system appears to match the F-35 HMDS in capability, particularly in the integration of a 360-degree electro-optical distributed aperture system, which remains one of the most technically demanding and expensive components of the American system. But the trajectory is clear. Every major air force in the world has accepted the premise that the helmet is where the future of fighter pilot capability lies. The race to build better helmet-mounted systems is now essential to the competition for air superiority as the race to build faster or stealthier aircraft. This brings us to the future. Because the F-35 HMDS, revolutionary as it is almost certainly not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a trajectory that points towards systems of even greater capability, and raises questions of even greater complexity. The next generation of helmet-mounted systems is already under development. Programs that aim to integrate artificial intelligence into the sensor fusion pipeline, AI systems that can look at the same raw data the current computers process and find patterns, make identifications, propose solutions faster and more reliably than any algorithm currently deployed. Imagine a pilot's helmet that does not just show them radar contacts, but tells them with high confidence exactly what each contact is, where it is going, what its likely tactical intentions are, and what the optimal response would be. Not as a rigid command, but as a recommendation that the pilot can accept, modify, or override based on their own judgment and the factors the AI might not perceive. The fusion of human intuition and artificial intelligence in the cockpit, the pilot's brain and the machine's processing power working in true collaboration, is the next frontier. Beyond that lies the question of whether pilots will remain in the aircraft at all. Unmanned combat aerial vehicles, drones, are already demonstrating capabilities in combat theaters around the world that would have seemed far-fetched a generation ago. The question of whether a human inside an aircraft, subject to biological limits of G-force tolerance, metabolic requirements, fatigue, and fear, will remain the optimal configuration for an aerial combat vehicle is one that military planners are debating with increasing seriousness. The helmet in this context may evolve into something that allows a human operator to control and perceive through an unmanned aircraft from a remote location, experiencing through remote sensors and haptic feedback a synthetic version of the same God vision that today's F-35 pilots experience in person. Or the helmet may evolve in the opposite direction, remaining in the cockpit, but becoming even more deeply integrated with the pilot's biology. Research into neural interfaces, into brain-computer interaction, into the possibility of controlling aircraft systems not through hand movements on a stick, but through direct neural commands is already underway in multiple research programs. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the United States military's primary technology incubator, has funded research into exactly these areas. The idea of a pilot who thinks a maneuver and the aircraft executes it, who intends to fire a weapon and the weapon launches, who wonders about a threat and the system immediately provides the answer, this is not science fiction. It is a research agenda. The $2 million helmet is the bridge between where we are and where we are going. Between the age of the pilot as athlete, dependent on physical skill and trained reflex, and the age of the pilot as commander, a human intelligence sitting at the center of an information web so rich, so deep, so comprehensive that the decisions they make are informed by a picture of reality that no unaided human mind could ever construct. There is something profound about this, something that reaches beyond the tactical and the strategic into the philosophical. Because the F-35 HMDS is not just a piece of military equipment, it is a statement about what we believe knowledge to be worth. It is a declaration that in the most consequential human activity, warfare, the organized application of violence in the service of political goals, information has become more valuable than muscle. That the pilot who knows more wins more certainly than the pilot who is stronger or faster or braver. That God vision, the ability to see all, to know all, to act on that knowledge before the enemy can, is the decisive variable in aerial combat in the 21st century. The great pilots of history were gods of the air in a different sense. They were gods of physical mastery, of the aircraft, of their own bodies, of the space through which they flew. The pilots of the F-35, strapping on their $2 million helmets, stepping into their $80 million aircraft and merging with a network of sensors and algorithms and data links that extend their perception across hundreds of miles of three-dimensional battle space. They are something different, something new, something that has never existed before in the history of warfare. They are gods of information, and the helmet is their crown. And yet, and this is perhaps the most important thing to say, Underneath the carbon fiber and the optical coatings and the head tracking sensors and the fiber optic cables and the display projectors and all of it, underneath all of that is a human being. A person with a family. A person who gets tired, who gets scared, who makes mistakes, who has doubts. A person who in the end is the one who has to decide. Who has to look at the picture that the helmet paints and say yes or no or wait. Who has to carry the weight of that decision and the weight of what follows from it, not just in the sky, but for the rest of their life on the ground. The technology is extraordinary. The engineering is extraordinary. The cost is extraordinary. But the soul inside the helmet, the conscience, the judgment, the humanity, that is still what matters most, and probably always will. The F-35's helmet-mounted display system stands today as perhaps the most consequential piece of wearable technology ever built. Not because of what it does to metal and machines, but because of what it does to the human being at the center of it. It extends them. It amplifies them. It makes them something greater than any individual pilot has ever been, more aware, more capable, more lethal, more connected to the battlefield in more dimensions simultaneously than any warrior in all of human history. And it does this while reminding us in every system and every safeguard and every custom fitting that at the end of all this technology there is still a person in there. Fragile and mortal and necessary. $2 million, one helmet, one pilot. And the ability to see the sky, all of it like a god. Before I close, I want to ask you something. And I mean this sincerely, because this is a question I find myself thinking about every time I dig into technology like this. If you were in charge, if you were the one making decisions about where military research dollars should go, would you spend it on the helmet, on the aircraft, on the training, on the unmanned systems that might eventually replace human pilots altogether? The calculus of military spending is one of the most consequential and least understood debates in modern democratic society. We pay for all of this, and we deserve to understand what we are paying for. Think about it, share your answer. Because the conversation about where this technology goes next should not happen only behind classified doors. It should happen out here with all of us. If you found this journey through the story of the F-35 helmet as extraordinary as I did researching and telling it, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel is where we go deep on the weapons, the technology, the history, and the human beings who shape the way wars are fought and civilizations survive or fall. Every week, another story like this one. You do not want to miss it.